Hello, everybody. Good morning, and welcome to this week's episode of Turning Towards Life. This is Lizzie and Justin live on Sunday morning, and we have a source from Justin today, written by the very person who's on this particular podcast / live broadcast. And I'm really glad to be here. And it's a hook or by crook one for me, in that I'm sitting on the floor in one of our lovely friend Nina's office, and everyone's asleep in the house, and I've been scrabbling around trying to find a computer and headphones. And I've just fed our little baby girl and hoping that she's okay. And I have yesterday's clothes on because I haven't actually had time to have a shower yet. So it's a lovely way to recognize that we're really in this practice properly for me, which is that I'm just going to get here whatever it takes and do my very best. And that makes me very glad, makes me very happy that I just kind of drop everything and turn to here. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for being with us. And I'm really glad to be doing this source, Justin. Thank you for writing it for us.
Yeah, you're really welcome, Lizzie. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to all of you who are on Facebook with us live this morning, and on our podcast and on YouTube, all these places. I'm very glad to be back. So many of you will know that last week we put out one of our in the bag recorded efforts because I and my family, we were saying goodbye to our oldest son, who has headed off on his own on a 6-month trip between ending school and starting university next year. And you'll know this, Lizzie, because we've talked about it. It's a big step for everyone. It's a big step for him, and it's a big step for us to be in a different configuration. And we're a week in, and his flight was at Sunday morning last week. And feeling very joyful and very tender for him being off on this adventure of stepping into adulthood that's so necessary, and feeling the big letting go, one of the many letting goes that's required for him being a parent and just being a human. So it was lovely to be able to put out last week one of the recordings that I think was a fabulous one. I was so looking forward to getting that one out into the world, and we have a couple more that are still in the bag for other future occasions. And it's really lovely to be back and just to be able to say something about this. And we've had some wonderful emails this week from people in different parts of the world who are listening in. And I just want to say hi to those of you who've written to us, and those of you who I know. A dear friend of ours in the northeast of the United States wrote to us and told us that she'd been listening to a bunch of these in a row on a long drive. And it was very moving to hear that anyone would want to do that. You could listen to us for hours if you like. There really are hours. So before we begin with this source, if any of you happen to be in London or would like to be in London on February the 15th and 16th, this is 2020, our very dear colleague Sue Braithwaite is going to be leading our Foundations of Coaching program. It's a 2-day program in London, which you can check out on our website, wearethirdSpace.org. And it's a really fabulous way of seeing how, Lizzie, what you and I do in these conversations also turns into a sort of a discipline, a way of working with people. So you can find out about us on the website. And now here is the source for this week. So I'll just read it. It's called Facing the Losses Together. There's a part of me that is tender, grieving, and terrified of loss. You'll leave me, he says. All of you. Friends, lovers, family, teachers, life itself. And he means me too, the one of whom he is a part, the one who is his home. He has sophisticated strategies to try to head off the losses he fears. He wants me to feel afraid always, so that we won't make a misstep which causes others to leave. He'd rather I punish myself if it will get people to stay. He holds on very tight, and sometimes as a result, I hold on very tight too. He's masterful at getting abandonment in first, finding ways for me to get resentful and abandon other people before they can abandon me. I've done this many times in his name. In a way, he feels satisfied when people do actually leave because it shows that his worldview and his deep fear are justified. Over time, I've come to see that my work is first the work of self-remembering, remembering that I'm vast and multifold, that as well as this part, there are many others, that there are things to feel that are different to what he's feeling. That it is secondly to turn towards the inevitable losses that he so fears, because none of his strategies will save us. And that it is mostly the work of not running from him, not visiting upon him the very abandonment that he fears, but holding him close, cradling him, honoring him. It's my work to welcome him home, to say, yes, I see you, I have you, you're safe here, you cannot fall. We can face life as it actually is, with all the losses that we cannot escape together. It's in this welcome that I'm freed to love in the way I want to love, to create, speak out, be vulnerable and intimate and angry and truthful and real, and to risk the risks that are required to be fully alive, the very risks that he's too afraid for me to take.
Over time, I have come to see that my work is first the work of self-remembering, remembering that I am vast and multifold, that as well as this part, there are many others, that there are things to feel that are different to what he's feeling. That is, secondly, to turn towards, that it is secondly, to turn towards the inevitable losses that he so fears, because none of his strategies will save us. And that it is mostly the work of not running from him, not visiting upon him every time. My brain's not working very well. And that it is mostly the work of not running from him, not visiting upon him the very abandonment that he fears, but holding him close, cradling him, honoring him. It is my work to welcome him home, to say, yes, I see you, I have you, you are safe here. You cannot fall. We can face life as it actually is, with all the losses we cannot escape together. It is in this welcome that I am freed to love in the way I want to love, to create, speak out, be vulnerable and intimate and angry and truthful and real, and to risk the risks that are required to be fully alive, the very risks that he is too afraid for me to take.
It's wonderful hearing you read. Lizzie, I'm always struck by this when we hear our words read through the mind and heart and body of another person. Well, this has been really big work for me. This piece got written a long time ago, but then I edited it and adjusted it this week in the light of my experience of all of this now. And I suppose the place that I want to start with it is to say something about what a revelation it first was and continues to be. I have to keep on remembering this. And I'm sure that this is not just true of me. I know that this is not just true of me, what I'm about to say, to find out that there's not one of me, but there are many, many, many of me. And that what for so long and so often, I suppose particularly when I'm not paying very much attention or when I'm really caught up, particularly in being afraid or something like that, is I forget. I very easily take myself to be the same as just some part of me. And that the first and the sweetest and most relieving move has been again and again to be able to see that what I'm feeling or what's speaking or what's got really caught up in something, in mostly for me in feeling very afraid, is only one part of a giant inner landscape, and that there are not only there are other parts, but there's also that of me that's beyond any of the parts in particular. And that's the move that underpins this whole piece, which is the letting go of identifying so strongly with just one aspect of myself. Every time I do that, I get freed up a bit. And the other thing that happens is I can experience such a great wave of relief that there can be another way to be in whatever it is situation I'm in.
Yeah, I'm so appreciating the it's like a simple way that you're bringing this to us through your own example, because as you're talking, I can see that this concept of parts and whole is really hard to grasp. But with your example, it's really clear to me, like I'm experiencing for myself that inherent in calling parts of myself, there is an inherent invitation to know that there is a whole as well as the parts. And that if I identify the part of me that, let me think of a real part here. The part that I identify with a lot in your writing, Justin, is the part that wants to run away before someone runs away from me. So the part that wants to say, well, I got in there first and therefore I'll hurt less because I've abandoned you before you've abandoned me. If I can identify that part as, say, the abandoning part, just the power of using that piece of language allows me to say, okay, so I'm holding the abandoning part in my hand now. But the very fact that I can hold something means there's more to me than just that. So I can then work with that part and talk to that part and ask that part things from a place that's not that part. And because I'm doing that, there's a view that comes, a sense of myself that comes, that's far more wholesome and reasonable and educated than this very often very young part, which doesn't really have a lot of sense to it, but it has a lot of feeling to it and a lot of reasonable reason to be that as well. But that if I can identify it as a part, it gives me a bigger opportunity to do something that's in service of what I really want, not what my trigger is wanting to have happen. So I can then examine it and work with it rather than do the thing, which would be to abandon before I'm abandoned, which would never, has never anyway, when I've done it, turned out the thing that should have been done in service of what I really wanted.
Yeah. I really appreciate this. There's so many different ways of talking about this, that what you're saying is when you can imagine holding a part in your hand, then you can find out that there's so much of you that's not that. You have so much capacity that's not just the capacity that's here in this part here. I've never really thought about it that way. I often imagine that what I have going on inside is like a family system. And the parts that, for me, that get caught up in the most reactivity and the most often get involved in the most unhelpful actions, like abandoning so as not to be abandoned, I'll very often feel like they're very young parts. They've got the kind of fearfulness and close in view that we have when we're little, and we haven't yet encountered the world. We haven't yet seen the world in its fullness. But they also don't know very much about the deeper, broader capacities that an adult human can have. So they're sort of really partial in their sense of what might happen and how it might happen. But the other thing is that they long for so much. So this part I was writing about here longs to not be abandoned. It's its deepest, deepest longing. And sure, when I've been sort of caught up in what this part wants in its desperation, I've done many times the abandon other people before they can abandon me, like withdraw from a friendship or withdraw from a relationship or not reply to a message or that kind of thing. But it has lots of other forms as well, which would be something like I'm holding back and not saying what I think is true, or just not saying anything, or just not doing anything, or just running away. And the paradox is, for me anyway, is that what this part of me, this very young part, I'm sure, really longs for is exactly the opposite of all of those. What it really longs for, the deep, deep, deep anguish longing there, is to be held and met. Almost like, you'll know this because you've got the teeny one, almost like, don't put me down. Like, what I want most is to be held and to never, ever, ever be put down. That longing. And that's why, after finding out that it's a part for me, which was such a revelatory move, oh my goodness, like you said, there are other parts and other capacity. And then in a way, there's a sort of me that is none of the parts, that's way deeper and broader and more spacious. There's also a relationship that I'm in with this part, or a relationship that this part is in with other parts of me, as well as with other parts of others. But the part that's in the way it's in relationship with other parts of me is, one of the things that I found out that I do is I abandon parts of myself in order to try to stop them from causing me so much pain. So it's like having a small child part that is terrified of being abandoned. And then what I'm doing without even knowing it is I'm actively trying to abandon that part so that it will stop hurting me, because it's so painful to be in contact with it. So sort of making the inner move of pushing it away or putting it down or isolating it, which is, I'm sure will be clear, never helps. It never helps to visit more anguish upon a part of ourselves that is already anguished in order to get it to stop being anguished. It can't work.
Yeah, and I think it takes great bravery to let the parts be here, because often it's the parts of us that we want to abandon and we want to push to the side are the parts that are, socially unacceptable, or have given us evidence before that they're not welcome here. Like someone's got cross with us, or someone has told us that that part is not okay, and you have to put that to the side or something because it's not reasonable, or it hurts somebody or something. And so I feel like it takes great courage to allow these things to be here. And also there's a responsibility in it too, because, for example, for me to let my angry part be here but not to inflict my angry part on other people, I have to have some sense of myself and the impact that I have, so that I can witness the part, be with the part, talk to the part, but also not just be the part. So I think it's really hard sometimes. And I think, it's reminded me of a conversation I had with my sister this week about, the parts of our children that we find challenging, that trigger us, and that we want to say, well, that's not okay, because you'll get hurt if that part comes forth in the playground or with your cousins or whatever. And, I just think my sister's one of those people who really has the courage to welcome all the parts of her children, and I admire it so much and want to cultivate that courage for myself to say, well, I know who you are so deeply. And I guess this is where our work comes in, Justin, of working with people, is that my contact with you is with the wholeness of you first and foremost. And so when a part does come forth, I'm speaking to that part or encountering that part and articulating with you that part in the context of our wholeness, your wholeness and my wholeness. And because, as you say, often when a part comes, we identify with that part. We go, well, I am angry. I am angriness. Instead of holding it here as a part and seeing it as a piece of me that's present here now that I can work with. And so in some way disidentifying with it just a tiny bit to have it be present in a way that's helpful rather than unhelpful to my true wishes as a person takes a lot of courage, because those parts are powerful. And interestingly, when you were talking about the kind of exiling them or pushing them to the side, my experience is the more I try and put it away, the more powerful it becomes. Like the more I try and pretend that I'm not angry or pretend that I'm not resentful, like resentment is a big one for me. Um, the more the resentment quietly kind of grips me on the inside. And then at some point it comes flying out because I've built it up in this little storage unit for however long about this particular thing. And all of a sudden it's coming teeming out when the people around me didn't even know I was annoyed at the first port of call 3 years ago or something. So to bring that here, often when it's been, that part has been building for a long time as well, because I've been exiling it for a long time, it's tricky work and it's hard. And to not identify with that resentment as if I'm right about being resentful can be really hard. And it takes increased awareness and keeping on being willing to be accountable as well, like being responsible for the way I feel and not thinking that the world is making me feel this way.
So you're talking so beautifully about the many complexities and subtleties of this. So there's getting gripped by a part, and then there's finding out that it is a part and not the whole. And then there's, how do I relate to the part? So, of course, if any of us maybe many of us have had this experience of being forcibly exiled by another. And when we get exiled, of course, we get desperate and use whatever strategy we can use to try and find our way home. And so it should be no surprise that our exiled parts do grow powerful in their exile in this way and want to assert themselves. And I'm really appreciating what you're saying, Lizzie, about it seems to me you're talking about the sort of the courage and tenderness, which is to welcome a part home, but at the same time not to fall into the trap of identifying with it. Now, how do you welcome a part in yourself or in another person? When you were talking about children, it struck me that this is true of anyone else that we're in relationship with. Our responsibility to, first of all, to be working with our own parts in this sort of respectful, attentive way, but also to know that when somebody else is angry or resentful or afraid or anything, that is only one part of them. And so learning to make the same move with other people, to really listen to and honor a part of another person while not being too convinced that that's the only part of them. And it's a really delicate move, I think, to welcome and be respectful of, but also not to treat what we're welcoming and being respectful as a whole, as the whole of something. And very often I think we get caught into this sort of polarity of opposites, which is I either have to welcome that part in me or that part in you and take it as face value and just let it run the show, or I have to rage against it or push it away. But there's a middle ground, which is holding our parts really lovingly and giving them a voice and making the move that I wrote about here, which is to say, I see you, I've got you. And there's a bigger something in which all of this happens. So it's an including move. And I realize I find myself wanting to say that this way at this moment, because I think when I've most got in trouble with myself or with other people, it's when I've fallen into this polarity. Either I have to just take as true everything that's happening, or I have to make sure that whatever's happening isn't happening. And either of those moves are so deeply disrespectful is what I mean to say, of something that is longing to show its presence, that we, at least in my experience, whenever I do this, I just get myself more and more entangled, more and more enmeshed in whatever difficulty there is that's going on.
Yeah. I was just thinking as well, Justin, how helpful it might be for us all to have a shared language around this, because inevitably in the everydayness of life, I don't know, having a fight about something, or you're in a, you know, meltdown inside yourself about something that's gone on or whatever. If we don't have language for these things, it's so hard to disidentify with them to the point where you can talk about them instead of just be them. So I'm finding this really helpful as a kind of a conversation to keep nurturing this way of speaking, and to commit to finding ways in my relationships to speaking about parts, because it's so helpful and freeing that you and I, for example, could have a conversation about one of my parts, and in a wrangle between us, we could say, well, should we try and find the part here, that we'd have a route to go that wasn't just this kind of tennis match
Mm.
of arguing with each other or disagreeing or something, but that we could do that and we could work with it. It feels like a very different way of living than most of us are going about doing our stuff. So I feel very invited by it and supported
Mm.
by it.
Well, it also seems to me that if we can take the responsibility to take the opportunity to name parts. So if I'm talking with you and if I find myself holding back, right, there's something that I want to say that I'm not saying. One way the conversation you could go is you could say to me, "You're holding back," and instantly I'm wounded, and it may be partially true, right? But I'm wounded, whatever. Or I could just not name it. But another move that I could make is I could say, "Lizzie, part of me is afraid of talking here." That would
Yeah,
be true. Part of me is feeling really anxious. Oh, and part of me is also longing to be in close connection with you and be in this conversation.
yeah,
And right now I'm feeling the fear of the part of me that's feeling anxious and doesn't want to speak, and I don't really know what to do about it.
mm,
But I want you to know that that's happening immediately. Or part of me is really angry with you. Part of me is really angry with you.
yeah,
I mean, then you've got the possibility, and I've got the possibility of talking to and with the part that's angry, because that's true, but also with the parts that um, love you and respect you and want to be in relationship with you and don't want to hurt you.
mm.
And then
And
you'll have all those parts, your parts too.
what an act of beautiful, kind self-care that is for the person where the part is visible. As in, the root of saying, this part of me feeling like I can't really say what I want to say, bringing it into the middle rather than just being the thing, it's really kind. I can feel it now. Like, if I were to say that in the conversation with you, how kind it would be. And I wouldn't be beating myself up, and I wouldn't be, but we'd have it open, it would be here. And it feels very generous to oneself to speak in that way, rather than the kind of self internal attack that I'm sure I would be in if I was holding back and talking to myself in my head about the whole thing, rather than bringing it present and bringing it to the middle of us, which seems
Yes.
so much kinder and so much more spacious and honoring.
It's a kind of glorious idea, I think, now, that to wonder about what would happen if we could bring the various parts of ourselves that are in play in conversation with the various parts of the others whom we're talking to, as well as with ourselves. So if I'm feeling angry or frustrated in a conversation with you, then there's the me that's not that part, that's in relationship with that part, and then there are other parts that are deeply loving and caring, and then there's the parts of you that are triggered and or loving or hopeful. So this way that you've invited us into having good language whilst things are happening is so beautiful, because it also allows us to lay out a whole load of parts with one another, and to really honor that more is always present than we've said.
Hmm.
And I think that's the thing that we forget. So with this piece that I wrote, when I'm afraid of being abandoned, that part is really helpful for me to be able to say to the people I love, there's part of me that's really afraid that you'll leave me if
Mm.
I tell you things, but there's also part of me that really trusts you. And they're both true.
Yeah.
Once you know that about me, we can speak in a different way than we could speak if you could only feel the part of me that's afraid, or if you only felt the part of me that trusts and you didn't know that there was a part that was afraid. The whole conversation is a different kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Justin, I have to say quickly, so I've just had this kind of connection in myself around, this is probably a whole nother episode, but around safety, relationship, and wholeness, and how, in order for these kinds of conversations to happen, we need to feel safe. And to feel safe is to feel inside a relationship, and inside a relationship that is holding contact with wholeness. And if we can be that for one another, if I can be for Justin's wholeness and I can commit to that, you can bring your parts to me and feel safe to do so, because my implicit holding is of the wholeness.
Yes.
And it feels like I've just made that connection in my mind around why, how it is that we feel safe. And that safety comes from someone else holding us when we can't see our wholeness. Someone else is there holding our wholeness so that that part can come forth without it feeling like I'm putting my whole self on the line, because the person holding our wholeness, that view of us as a whole being that has parts, enables us to bring that forth. So we're so important to each other in
Mm.
this. So hard to do this on our own, because our wholeness is so obscured so much of the time.
It's such a brilliant topic, and I think we must take it up, and it's probably many weeks of conversation.
Yeah.
It's striking me as a parting thought. Of course, this practice and discipline of coaching that we do and that we help other people to learn to do is really a way of responding to the wholeness of somebody. That when somebody comes saying, I'm struggling with something, it's our job not to just get caught up in the part that's struggling, but with the wholeness of the person. But actually, the place that I was thinking about, Lizzie, as we've been talking about relationships, friendships, and partnerships, and relationships, parenthood, and all friendships, all different kinds, is that when we love someone, it really helps to love their wholeness, not to fall in love with some part and then depend upon our relationship being dependent upon that part showing up all the time.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're going to be in a relationship with someone over the long term, it really helps to be in contact with their wholeness, because the parts and the relationships between them will change again and again and again all the way through a life.
Yeah.
That's really on my mind this morning.
Mm.
This has been a beautiful conversation. Again, thank you so much, Lizzie, and it's time for us to end. Thank you, everybody who's with us. We are so glad that we get to do this, and that we get to do this because you're all alongside us in growing numbers. So please tell other people if you're finding this moving and powerful and useful and enlivening and entertaining, whatever it is that you're finding, please, you could tell other people about it. That would be a wonderful thing, and we can share this around more widely. And Lizzie, you and I will be back next week, all being well.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.